This is the story of the stolen Benin artifacts and the return to its motherland. When you mention the Benin Kingdom, you think of an extremely rich cultural heritage and its legendary arts and crafts dating back to the 10th century. Benin is famous for their large body of historical ancient artifacts. Yet, somehow, most of the art cannot be found in the Benin Kingdom itself. On the 12th of January, 1897, there was an operation to invade the Kingdom of Benin, capture the Benin Oba, and destroy the Benin city. The operation was named the Benin Punitive Expedition. The British Empire soldiers sacked and looted the city. More than thousands of historical objects from the Benin Kingdom were looted. About 40% of the art was sent to the British Museum, while others were given to individual members of the armed forces as spoils of war, and the remainder were sold as auctions. The Benin Kingdom has one of the oldest ongoing monarchies in the world. The current Oba, His Royal Majesty, Oba Ewuweri II, the great-great-grandson of the Oba who was ambushed by the British in 1897, started his rule by demanding the stolen Benin bronzes had to come back to where they were taken from.
The Benin royal family, through the federal government of Nigeria, has been asking relentlessly for the return of the artifacts removed from Benin. Many of these artifacts transcend mere art. They are in very many cases objects of religious significance to us. In 1935, my revered grandfather, His Royal Majesty Oba Akinzwa II, made the earliest request by asking for the return of 2 brass tools in the Berlin Museum. This Berlin Museum, that's in Germany. This was long before Nigeria even became independent. The originals have still not been returned. However, in 1938, my grandfather, His Royal Majesty Oba Akinzwa II, successfully had a coral bead coronation regalia returned by the British government.
The federal government of Nigeria, as well as the Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, have made several efforts to secure the repatriation of the looted artifacts from all the museums around the world in order to preserve the Benin culture, heritage, and tradition. Decades ago, no one would ever imagine these Benin artifacts will return back to the original owners. But now, the story has changed. In recent times, the artifacts are beginning to return back piece by piece to the Benin Kingdom, now known as Benin City, the capital of Edo State in Nigeria. In October 2021, Jesus College, part of the University of Cambridge, became the first institution in the world to return a Benin bronze to Nigeria.
I hope that the restitution of this exquisite Benin bronze artefact, started by the students and the fellowship here at Jesus College, Cambridge, will mark the beginning of the next wave. One that will see more treasures returning to their birthlands. I can't wait to see them displayed in the country in which they were created.
In an October 11, 2022 ceremony, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. transferred ownership of 29 Benin bronzes to the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria.
I guess when I came to the museums and I saw them on display and I saw that they were up, I got the reaction that I tend to have when I see work that I think is being procured unethically by museums that's on display, which is really quite it really makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm South African, and I've traveled to museums around the world, and I'm very sensitive to this issue. And when I see objects that are unethically taken or stolen or looted on display in Western museums, it makes me feel like I don't belong in that museum. And so it was really important for me that they come down immediately or as soon as I could, so that other visitors who came to the museum wouldn't feel uncomfortable or that their cultural heritage or something that perhaps didn't belong to the museum was on display.
In December 2022, German representatives visited the Nigerian capital to officially hand over 22 bronzes, physically returning 2, a plaque and an Oba's head as a gesture of good faith.
What is crucial is you know where they are. You know they belong to Nigeria. And you know you can always come, and they can also always come back to their home.
We will nudge the British Museum to do what is right. But I met a brick wall. The British Museum and all those holding on to our artifacts must understand that repatriation is a cause which time has come. They must also understand that many of these cultural objects are not mere art to us, but the true essence of our being.
In May 2024, the 2 items were handed over to the NCMM on behalf of the Nigerian government by the German authorities in 2022. The Director General of the NCMM, Mr. Olugbile Holloway, made the presentation on behalf of the federal government through the National Commission for the Museum and Monuments.
For us, this symbolizes a gesture and a step in the right direction. And I think I speak for everyone on our team when we say we remain loyal to the Royal Court. And if there's anything we can do to continue to support this laudable cause, this heritage is not just Benin heritage, it is Nigeria's heritage.
In a ceremony held on 15th of July 2024 at the Benin Palace in Nigeria, the museum restituted 2 objects, a brass plaque and a wooden altarpiece, to Oba Ewuwari II, returned by the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art. I got a chance to sit down with Mr. Olugbile Holloway, the Director General of the NCMM, and discuss the return of the Benin artifacts. So I saw this recent video of you at the Oba of Benin's palace, and it really got my attention. That's the reason why I reached out to you. So can you tell us exactly what was happening at that remarkable location?
The video you saw
Initially, it was supposed to be a courtesy visit to the Oba. The new appointment in my role as the DG, I will need to interact with the royal court quite a bit. So it was supposed to be a courtesy visit, but as fate would have it, we were also able to return 2 stools to His Royal Majesty. The 2 stools we returned were the stool that belonged to Oba Erosoyen and Oba Esige. And these stools are from 17th century and 18th century.
Okay.
And the Oba was very happy.
Okay.
It was actually a surprise. He wasn't aware that we were bringing the stools.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes, because they had made a request to the NCMM
Okay.
that they would like to have the stools back.
Okay.
And we discussed it internally, and we thought that it was only right that those stools were returned to their original home because they were taken from the palace in 1897.
Of course. So where were they returned from?
These particular stools were returned from Germany
Okay.
about 2 years ago,
Okay.
and they were stored with the NCMM.
Okay. So Germany also has returned some artifacts in the past before.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So the German government have been extremely helpful
Okay.
in terms of repatriating a lot of our artifacts with them.
Okay.
I'll say they're probably one of the most forthcoming when it comes to repatriations. We still have quite a few objects with them,
Okay.
and we're still in the process of bringing them back, but they've agreed to return these objects.
Okay, so have they agreed to return all of them or just some?
The majority of them, yes, they've
Okay.
agreed to return them.
Oh, that's wonderful news.
Yes.
So
yes.
with time, do we have a duration time?
So there's no fixed time to this.
Okay.
We're also in the process of building a storage facility in Benin.
Okay.
So the storage facility will house most of these returned objects.
Okay.
So it's in our interest to finish the storage before we repatriate these objects back. So most likely we're looking at, by the end of the year,
Okay.
a lot of them would have started coming back. The process to bring back artifacts, there's no clear process because you're having discussions and negotiations with different countries who have different laws, and you're talking to different people who may or may not agree with your position. So it's really about negotiations.
Okay.
But I think at the heart of all repatriation is diplomacy. You're not going, it's not a fight, it's more like a discussion, and you're reasoning with the foreign country and explaining to them how things have changed and how you would like these objects back. And I think it's important for us to understand that our position as Nigeria is we request the unconditional return of these objects. What that means is we don't want the objects loaned to us. We don't want replicas. We want the exact objects that we're taking. So that's the core of a lot of our discussion.
There's a popular film, Black Panther, by Ryan Coogler. It came out in 2018. Now, there's a museum haze scene in the movie that added a lot of fuel to the debate about the African art resolution. And in the movie, one of the stars of the movie, Michael J. Jordan, actually went as far as saying, how do you think your ancestors got these? Do you think they paid a fair price, or did they take it like they took everything else? How did you feel? Have you watched the movie, first of all?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and how did you feel when that scene?
I know the exact scene you're talking about.
Okay.
So I think that was a very powerful scene.
Okay.
And I think the scene perhaps ignited a wider discussion about these artifacts and my repatriation and things like that. While I don't condone the stealing of an artifact from a foreign museum, I understand the sentiment of the character. And the question raised about how these artifacts were obtained in the first place is a conversation that needs to be had. Because the reality is that these artifacts were stolen.
100%.
And I think that in 2024, the dialogue that needs to happen now needs to be around truth and reconciliation.
Exactly.
Right? I think everyone needs to come clean and own up to what was done. And a lot of rights have to be wronged. If you look at the 1897 expedition, where Oba Varawen was removed, the tragedy is really what spurred this whole spread of Benin artifacts around the world. 1897 was the actual day that, and I'm sure you've seen pictures of the British soldiers with the loots and everything. So for me, it's about restoration.
Okay.
It's also about paying homage to our heritage and going back into the past and correcting a lot of the wrongs and, giving the Nigerian a strong sense of identity about where they're coming from, about where their ancestors were coming from. And the fact that you come from a long line of great men and women that have come before you, and to see these artifacts and to appreciate them, for me, I think will go a long way in reigniting that inner self-worth. And I think when you speak of the renewed hope agenda, I think that a renewed hope agenda cuts across different aspects of the human experience, even heritage, even the appreciation of the past, and the appreciation of our ancestors and what they believed in and what they stood for. I think that it has to be an all-encompassing story, and I think that this commission is committed to changing the narrative and really doing our own part to make sure that our heritage is truly appreciated.
Okay, another question I have is, and a lot of people will have, why has it taken so long? These artifacts just started coming recently from Sweden as well. We did a report on that. But why has it taken so long? Are you telling me there haven't been anyone within the decades that have been able to do the negotiations?
So I think that the artifacts have been coming back quietly for a couple of years now. But you also have to understand that the world is changing. Right? The consciousness of the world is changing. And the perception of what was done to Africa is I think we're only coming to terms with it as human beings. Conversations are being had now that were probably never had 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Exactly, like this one.
Exactly, and you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And you even look at the Me Too movement, right? There's a wind of justice that's blowing around the world. And I guess as human beings become more conscious, they start to revisit the past and perhaps try and understand certain things that were done and how to correct them. And you have to understand that even the British Act of 1960 that prohibits the removal of objects, 1960 was still very segregated, right? That was the peak of the civil rights movement. Even the rights we had as black people in the world was far, far diminished to what we have now. So this is 2024. There's a new wind of consciousness, and I think that is what is spurring this conversation and the return of these artifacts.
When I was reading up on the British Museum, it says that under any circumstance would they not let artifacts be out of the museum if not duplicated or not at all. So sometimes when I hear stories of them bringing them back, I start imagining that could this be replicated items? Because even in Nigeria, for tourists here, if you go to like the Echo Hotel, you can find loads of replicas and they look exactly the same. So now what's the guarantee that these items that they're returning to us are not actually replicated? So
I think first things first, NCMM, we have experts that can basically give us the provenance of an artifact. There are ways to date an artifact. You can use carbon dating, where it's difficult to fake that something has been around since 1700, because there are actual chemical processes that you can use to check the date of an artifact, right? And then also some of the techniques used then differ from the replicas we see now, right? So, for example, a lot of the artifacts that were taken from Benin and Ife they were created using something called the lost wax method. It's a very particular method of creating these artifacts, and that in itself is a telltale sign of the era the artifact came from. So there are ways, right? Yes, I do agree that there are a lot of fake artifacts out there on the black market, but as NCMM, because we have trained professionals that have studied these things and archaeologists, where we always verify and make sure that every artifact we bring back is actually authentic.
Wonderful. So now, speaking about the process of making it, you mentioned
the lost wax method.
Lost wax method. Okay, so now, fair enough, the artifacts have been out of the country for the longest time now. They're returning it. How come Nigerians are not making new ones, new artifacts? Maybe, if not replaced, but can substitute for, you know, newer historical figures.
So I think that we have to understand that the artifacts you see now, they were once considered art,
Okay.
and they were once considered sacred objects, okay? The process of art in itself is a continuum, right? So, for example, a Benin statue, like the one outside the museum of Anyanwu, was made in the 50s, right? But in the next 100, 200 years, it will be an artifact.
Yeah.
It's already an artifact, right?
Okay.
So the question now is, what time span do you use to consider something an artifact?
Okay.
And I guess it now becomes subjective.
Okay.
But as we're creating objects in the modern time, as time goes on, these things become artifacts because
Okay.
time passes and then...
The longer that it stays.
Exactly. So I will say we're still creating because
So it's
art
been
is
in
still...
creation.
Yes, art is still ongoing and it's a continuous process. But
Perfect.
a lot of these objects that we call artifacts are actually sacred objects because a lot of them were used for initiations, coronations, and invocations and, you know, sacred practices that our ancestors believed in. So I guess to the indigenous Nigerians and the indigenous tribes that created this within Nigeria, they see them a bit more than artifacts. They have a spiritual connotation to a lot of these objects that you see.
Okay, now the decision to establish a world-class museum at the Oba's Palace was one of the safest places in the world, and obviously will encourage curators across Europe and in other parts of the world to be confident and support the advocacy for the safe return of stolen artifacts of the Benin Kingdom. Now, can we discuss more on this? Where is this world-class museum now? Can we get more details of the museum at the Oba's Palace? You just visited. So
Yes.
what did you see? Because I haven't been there.
So,
Can you tell us what you saw?
I believe your question is around the Benin Royal Museum.
Okay.
Okay, so to understand, so first things first, I need to explain that this is a private museum being driven by the royal court, right? NCMM is involved because obviously we're the governing body for museums.
Okay.
The Edo State government is involved and the federal government is involved,
Okay.
as well as key players in the private sector.
Okay.
So you have multiple stakeholders coming together to make this a reality. Now, the reasoning or the thinking behind a Benin Royal Museum goes back to 1897. A lot of the objects that were originally taken were actually taken from the palace and the palace grounds. And there was actually a museum in the palace then.
Okay.
Because some of the stools that were stolen were taken in 1897, but some of them date as far back as 1505, which shows you that there was already a culture, a tradition of storing and preserving things.
Okay. Wonderful.
So the thinking behind the Benin Royal Museum is to somehow restore that lost pride and to bring these artifacts as close to their original home as possible.
Okay.
And I know that there are talks around perhaps even situating the museum around the actual route the British took to come into Benin to steal the artifacts in the first place. So that it's an immersive experience, right? And I also
That's
want
interesting.
very interesting, and I also want to give credit to the Benin Royal Court, especially the Oba of Benin, his passion for the artifacts is quite commendable. And I've had personal discussions with him, and I have no doubt that these artifacts will be given the honor they deserve with the Royal Court involved. And NCMM's involvement also is one of collaborative custody. So we have a storage facility we're building in Benin. It's a world-class storage facility, should be completed before the end of the year.
Wonderful.
It is our understanding that with the blessing of the Oba of Benin, a lot of these artifacts will still be stored in that storage facility.
Okay.
So that the Benin Royal Museum and the NCMM will work hand in hand to exhibit these artifacts to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
And obviously with the support of the Edo State government and the private sector. So it's really a case of all hands on deck, everyone coming together, because we also need to send a message to the international world that we're capable of working together, and that the discussions around ownership, custody, storage, we feel has almost become an excuse not to return these artifacts. So we're saying clearly that there is no ambiguity for us. We're all working together as one.
Nice.
The artifacts will come back, and the Benin Royal Museum will become a thing of reality.
But the return is not the end of the story for these magnificent objects. The story of the stolen Benin artifacts is a powerful narrative of resilience and cultural heritage. The ongoing efforts to restoring these artifacts not only honors the legacy of the Benin Kingdom, but also empowers the future generation to recognize, respect, and celebrate their rich cultural history.